Hi, Luke. Welcome to Finding Focus, a podcast about founders and their stories. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. I guess off the bat, would you want to give a quick introduction about your background and Pixel?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Luke. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Pixels. I've been working on this for over 4 years now, which is kind of nuts, but it hasn't always been Pixels. Basically, some background on me is since my story is like kind of personal, tied in with like the business stuff too. Is I started coding when I was like 12 years old, and I went to university. I studied computer science and economics. And the entire time I was at university, I was kind of flirting with dropping out. But I got really involved with the startup scene when I was 18 as well too. I started working full time at the startup during my freshman year, like first semester. And then, yeah, I was either always building something myself in addition to school or like working with other people. And yeah, when I was 19, I got like first full time job offer and to be a software engineer, and I was like almost about to take it, and then like basically every single year, I didn't take it. I was like flirting with dropping out, going full time into software engineering. But at the end of the day, I graduated. I was really thankful for it. But my intention after I graduated was like I always knew I was going to go work at a company for like a year or two, and then leave it, and then try to do something on my own. So I graduated. I started working at a company called Workday, and I worked there as a software engineer for like about a year and a half. And then that year and a half came and I quit and I moved to New Zealand. And my intention when I moved to New Zealand was I was going to start working on some like indie hacker projects, do a bit of freelance work, and then kind of see what happens. Yeah, back at that time, I never really intended to go and start a startup or a large company. I was really just trying to build something that supported myself, and that was kind of the whole like mindset at the time. When I was in New Zealand, this was in 2020. I got really lucky. I was there during the pandemic, and New Zealand locked down, and it kind of changed a lot of stuff. Obviously, like the pandemic had a huge effect. But my experience during the pandemic was I was basically locked in a cabin by myself in the bush of New Zealand for like 2 or 3 months, like completely isolated, and I had nothing to do. I knew this was like kind of a dangerous situation, like mentally, if I was just like completely isolated from everybody. I was like literally in a part of New Zealand. It was the west coast of New Zealand on the South Island. That's the least populated part of an already very unpopulated country. And on this place I was staying, there was basically nobody else. It was just me. And during that time, during the pandemic in New Zealand, they locked down very strictly. Basically, you could only go to the grocery store. So it's interesting because looking back, that was actually probably the best 3 months of my life. Basically, what happened was I got really, really regimented. I stuck to like an extremely strict schedule. I mapped out every single minute of my day for like the 3 months, essentially, like from like 6:30 a.m. to like 6:45. I go to the bathroom and like shower from like 6:45 to like 6:55. I make my coffee from like 6:55 to 7. I do this, and I had every single minute mapped out. And out of that basically like 3 month period, I basically just like worked out, watched the sunset every single day, and then worked on coding something. And it's interesting because out of that experience, I kind of built what became Pixels. So it wasn't Pixels at the time, it was a very different type of company. It was the first application of this new technology called spatial video chat. The company Gather.town, if anybody's familiar with that, kind of took that to its full expression. But essentially, it was this new type of way to meet online that combined like kind of like a video game and Zoom. So if you got close to people inside of this virtual room or space, it would start a video chat with them. And if you walk too far away, it would start a video chat with other people. It was really cool. And I built it all on my own. My experience is like, full stack development, and it was a really hard thing to build. But what's interesting is like for the next year, I had this thing and it actually seemed somewhat promising. Like the tech was interesting. It was getting some interest from like outside people. And it seemed like this was something that I should focus on full time and like really try to put my all into this specific thing, which was not really my game plan when I had started, but it just seemed like it could potentially be something. So for the next year, I basically spent like that whole year banging my head against the wall trying to see if I can make something work with this. And really, I didn't make like any significant progress. I had a few people that were like trying to work on this with me because they saw some promise in it too, but none of us knew what we were doing. Like we weren't very experienced entrepreneurs. And yeah, if we had like the right skill set back then we actually probably could have turned it into something. But even it's interesting, like the fullest expression of what it could have been, Gather That Town, didn't really end up working either. So, at the time I saw this other company, Gather That Town, start to blow up. They raised tons of money. They raised like they built a huge team, all this kind of stuff. I was feeling kind of jealous, but yeah, that's like a separate tangent, but not really important. So about a year into um, like building out, we called it like Banger Mesh back at the time. We finally met an investor who like kind of took a leap of faith on us. And when I say us, it was just like me and one other friend. And they put like 120K in. We finally were able to hire some people to like help build out some of the features that we wanted. And yeah, it was interesting, like finally learning how to like run a team, like get some legitimacy. Like it was a good feeling to like have somebody believe in me, like put some money into that. We took it really seriously. But even then, like after that investment, still didn't really go anywhere. But we had some like better mentorship at that time. And then yeah, I guess like the date is now like September 2021. We had gotten one investment. We did a startup accelerator. Still, like the stuff that we were doing wasn't quite working, and we were wrapping up a startup accelerator that we had joined, and it was really really clear that like this tech, like we just weren't in the right industry. We weren't selling it in the right way. The product wasn't quite like hitting in the way that it should. And our mentors were like, yeah, you probably need to pivot. We were running really low on money. I think we had like 25K in the bank left in the business. And yeah, essentially I was just like, okay, yeah, I'm probably done being an entrepreneur. But I've kind of owe it to these people who believed in me to like at least try something else still. Because really, when they invested in the business, they weren't investing in the business; they were investing in me, like me trying to do my best at figuring all of this out. So yeah, that month of September, I had to give a pitch at a demo day for a startup accelerator. My pitch was basically, hey, I tried this kind of stuff. None of it's working. I have no idea what's going to work. I really did try my best, but I think what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go to Tulum for a month. And, maybe after I go to Tulum, I'll figure something out. I literally pitched this to like hundreds of investors. And yeah, that's what I did. And actually, during that month, I got really intentional inside of that month. I kind of recreated that like little experience I had in New Zealand in that cabin. And I tried like basically a ton of different business ideas. I basically made like one or two landing pages a day. I was willing to throw away like the entire tech stack that we had before. And interestingly enough, like one of these ideas that we had tried during that month actually seemed like it was getting some traction and some attention in a way that nothing I'd ever tried had before, and it was convincing enough for me to continue to build it. And it's crazy like how fast things can move once something starts to click a little bit. Basically, like I went to Tulum with nothing. I tried out this idea, like I showed it to some people, and then I ended up raising a seed round within like a month after that, starting from basically scratch, which was pretty cool. And yeah, that was kind of the starting point of Pixels. Like during that month is when what became Pixels happened essentially. And it's been a long journey since then. Like ever since we started Pixels, there's been like a ton of growth, a lot of changes that we've done, lots of up and downs. Like Pixels has almost died like 3 or 4 times since then also. But now it's kicking and doing pretty well.
Wow, wow, wow. There's so much to dig in. I would love to talk about those near death experiences, but I think what stood out to me was kind of that super focused environment that you created for yourself in New Zealand and in Tulum. Like, what was what what like what was the catalyst to that, and what do you think enabled you to be that focused? Was it just being isolated socially, saying no to all your friends, or was it the regimen of like the discipline routine, 6:30 a.m. like shower thing? What was it?
Yeah, that was a crazy amount of magic in that New Zealand experience that I had, and I've recreated it a couple times to like really great effect. But like, I don't think I'll ever be able to create those specific circumstances again. Essentially, what happened was I got placed in a cabin, or like I found a cabin, in the middle of the bush. It didn't even really have internet. It had 102 kilobytes of internet. I could barely get a Google search out. If I wanted to access the internet, I had to drive 10 minutes up a hill to get 4G. And like basically, I would do that about once or twice a week to go push my code from GitHub. That way, right? Like I got like a really good offline dev setup going. But essentially, it was zero distractions, like complete zero distraction, and like the best circumstance to be in a zero distraction space. Even then, though, I think without that routine that I had, I probably would have gone insane or I would have not got much done. But also, like I didn't have a TV, I didn't have like other people to distract me. So I combine like that distraction free environment with like a sense of purpose of like, okay, if I am here, one, I'm going to be completely present. I also went completely sober, like off of caffeine, no alcohol, anything like that. And then I was extremely disciplined with physical fitness too. I was doing like an hour or two of like workouts in the morning and then an hour and a half of yoga a night, every single night without fail. I was also like inadvertently extremely on top of things like sleep health. So like I didn't use my phone really ever. And because I was doing yoga before bed, I didn't really like watch my phone or like scroll through things before bed. Um, yeah, I was also reading a lot of Stoicism at the time too, and like I remember the biggest point that was sticking out to me during that time frame was like one, all the Stoics, they're like, you have to get up before sunrise. You absolutely have to do it. So I was like, okay, if I'm in this like mindset, I'll do that. And then like I know there's like some also Stoic, it might be Marcus Aurelius too, who's like, you gotta get up right out of bed immediately when you wake up. Like he has like some quote that's more like, how are you sleeping in bed for so long and like
Yeah, yeah.
wasting your time? But
And the
like
comfort of your blankets, like feeling
yeah,
warm,
yeah.
and
I took that really
while the bees
seriously.
are flying, and men are supposed to be doing their duty.
Yeah, that's the exact quote. But like, I took that seriously. And, like, there is a lot of truth to that. Like, that kind of stuff actually works, which is
Yeah.
annoying, but it's true. And yeah, it was like the perfect environment to get like super disciplined around all of that stuff. And it was interesting because I was basically in like, I haven't recreated this to that effect, but like 7 or 8 hours of like focused flow a day where it didn't even feel hard. Like yeah, after like 2 months when I was there, there were some other people that came onto the property, and like I finally had some human interaction, and they would like try to talk to me, and I'd be like, I just want to get work done. I'm in like such a good mind state in the flow state where like I didn't want to like have any distractions. It was interesting because it's not necessarily how I feel in these circumstances when I'm like in LA with like other people and all these distractions, screens and internet around me. It's like you literally couldn't pull me from like what I wanted to do. And yeah, it was honestly the best I've ever felt mentally, like physically. Um, yeah, it was great.
Wow. Well, I think that that state is the whole purpose of this podcast. Is to teach people like how do you find focus? How do you create that environment? Because it's actually so delicate, right? Like I've approached it a few times in my life, but it's like it requires so many things to like hit in succession. And yeah, and I heard like from Naval that like the greats of the greats just they don't know. It's not like they know something we don't. Is that they just haven't taken up all the bullshit that we do, and they don't like consume all the junk. They are just like clean mind.
Yeah, no, I remember thinking during that time period, it's like, wow, my brain feels like how a brain is supposed to feel, I think. I think this is like how my mind is supposed to feel every single day. And like I hadn't felt like that until that. Like I guess like it was almost like a detox of like all of this conditioning that we have after being in that environment for so long. Yeah, it was really nice. Also, like, yeah, zero caffeine that whole time too, which is interesting. Like even now, like
Mm,
I've gone through periods of like sobriety where I'm still on caffeine and like I'm starting to wonder is like that actually sober? I don't know.
mm,
It's not nothing, right?
yeah, yeah. I drink green tea, so even I can't say I'm completely sober. Um, yeah, I've also been just realizing how important sleep really is. Like it goes so deep, and that consistency of sleep schedule, not only sleep quantity, but the consistency of timing, that really has like sets you in the rhythm. And it takes you like a couple days, if not a week, to like really get into that. So the
Yeah.
whole time you're like sub efficiency.
So here's the other perspective too, though, because I think I've lived on the extremes of both sides. Like I lived like a really regimented, extreme lifestyle like that, and then the other half of like the business building too that I kind of fast forwarded through was like I was actually traveling full time through a lot of it. Like part of me creating this business was I was living on a sailboat in the most unpredictable lifestyle possible, and like looking back, I have no idea how I got it done, but also like I got so much done during that time frame. I was literally like crewing on a sailboat, doing like hours of work a day on the sailboat, and then every single time when my work would finish on that boat, I would go into the aft cabin and just like type away on my computer, like hunched over because there was no room there. And it was working for a long time. I did that for like 4 or 5 months as well, and it was like some of the most productive times too, in like extreme uncertainty and extreme instability. And I think part of why that worked at the time when I look back was one, I was extremely content with the lifestyle I was living, where I am the kind of person that likes to get the most out of life. So what that looks like for me is one, living presently and doing like really cool and interesting things. And then two, it also involves like a sense of purpose too. And like being really early in my career at the time, like building something was giving me a really strong sense of satisfaction and purpose besides just like the real life stuff I was doing. And that was like a different type of flow in a way because I was doing both. And it
Mm.
was working for a while. And I don't think if I put myself into that circumstance as I am right now, that I would be as productive as I was back then. I think I would like, finish up with the like work I did. The work I did was nuts on that sub. I was literally like going under the deck of the sailboat with like 2 or 3 feet of clearance, like hunched on my back. Our bilge pump wasn't working, so I would have to like get a bucket and a sponge and sponge out the water under this deck and basically be a human bilge pump. And then I would have to like crawl on my stomach with this bucket out. I did that for like an hour or two a day, and then yeah, yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I think I would have been like me in this current state. I think I would just be like, okay, I did my work. I don't want to do anything else now. But like back then, I think that like initial early energy and like sense of purpose of just like building anything was really driving me.
Wow, that's incredible. I feel like I would really not thrive under such a chaotic environment. I feel like
Yeah,
I
I
need
love
the
chaos to be
regimen.
honest.
Do you feel like you thrive better under chaos or order? Because it sounds like you've done both.
My personal preference is like I'm an extreme risk taker, and I actually love chaos. That like moment of order, I think I almost view it like medicine for me, where I think it's good for me to do that every now and then because I'm somebody that loves chaos and I love unpredictability. Even it's interesting in my day to day life right now, I think I'm feeling some feelings of unhappiness because I feel like my life is way more routine than I would like it to be. I like having no idea what I'm doing in a given day. And there's like some excitement about that and like the professional lifestyle when you're like doing a startup, right? But it's not to the extreme I was doing before, where I would like literally wake up when I was living in Africa and be like, okay, what am I doing today? To maybe I'll milk a camel, maybe I'll go herd some goats. Like it's like a whole different thing, right? It's like not the same level at all.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get to Africa. That's a crazy story you told me. You mentioned Stoicism. Obviously, I'm a philosophy major, so love Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king. Um, what made you pick that up? Like, do you feel like philosophy is helpful for founders?
I think it was really important for my own personal development. And I think it's interesting because like I know some people get really deep into other areas of philosophy, but I've just never been drawn to many other things besides Stoicism, to be completely honest. And I don't know what exactly it was about Stoicism that drew me in. But I think part of it was just the idea of like purpose and values behind it. I grew up in like a Christian household and with a religious bringing up. So like I don't know, I kind of gravitate towards the idea of like there being values and the idea of like good and bad. And I think Stoicism draws upon that a lot too. And I think the idea of just like living with purpose and living with values was like an interesting thing to me. Especially when I think about things like masculinity and like who I want to be in the future, all that kind of stuff. I think that's where I draw like even a lot of my current inspiration of like, what kind of man do I want to be? Um, and yeah, I know there's like different trains of thoughts and everything, but it's just the thing that I like aligned with most essentially.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Marcus Aurelius is the most underrated manager of all time. Like his managerial advice is like wake up today and tell yourself you're going to be faced with people who are incompetent, greedy, self-interested, jealous, and I'm just like, that's such a good meditation to, go into the workday with, and like just be stoic to it all.
Yeah, damn. I now I'm realizing like I need another reading of this. It's like you learn it once and then you get some great practices and it changes how you are and how you operate. But I think like the reminder, honestly, I'm due for it now.
Yeah, I think it's one of those books that worth a read every so often. The first time I read it, I didn't appreciate it. I actually told my friend like, it's kind of overrated, and then I picked it up again, and I realized like it's a completely different read every time you read it because you've grown and you now can absorb more of what he's trying to say. But this is literally the emperor of the greatest civilization in ancient history managing like entire armies through a pandemic, and just hearing his thoughts goes really deep.
Damn. Yeah, okay, I'm sold. Really about to
But
go.
yeah, that right out of bed thing, it's hard. I will say it's really hard, and
Yeah, honestly, I've struggled with it recently again too, and I don't know why. I think it's like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it is on my end. Yeah, I think it's really easy for me to like be hesitant for the work because the work is more stressful than it was before. I
yeah.
think about that a lot. It's just like leveling up the level of stress that you are capable of handling, right? Like the further that you progress through anything in like the startup world, like the truth is like the stress doesn't decrease in my experience at least, it just keeps increasing, and like your ability to handle the stress gets better hopefully. But yeah, I don't know, I think that might be part of it right now where it's like I wake up, I'm like, damn, there's so much I have to do, maybe I don't want to actually deal with it in the face, and I think that's a big issue, to be completely
hmm
honest. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I actually think is a great like key indicator of like fulfillment and alignment to your purpose is that first moment when you gain consciousness. Are you like jumping out of bed? That's one of my life goals is to work on something that can consistently get me to that state of jumping out of bed. Because I remember as a kid, and I had a summer off to play video games. It's like, oh, I don't want to be asleep. Like, I'd sleep less. And now it's like, oh, okay, I gotta take my cold shower, do my meditations. A little bit, it's like tough, but yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because like the most productive I've been ever in my life has been when it's felt the easiest to do that kind of stuff because there's nothing else I've wanted to do. And I've been thinking about that a lot when it comes to like the stuff I'm doing. It's like, okay, like it actually is extremely important to be working on stuff that you really want to do. And like aligning that with purpose in life and like values in life too. And it's interesting because like sometimes I always wonder like, is what I'm doing like completely aligned with purpose and values? And I think it's interesting because I actually don't think that what you need to do on like the high level always needs to be like something that's like so noble and great. What I have always been framing it as, and like what is actually like giving me a lot of purpose, is more on like the people side of things internally, where it's like, okay, actually, the work I'm doing like really greatly affects people who I actually care about, the people who work for me, or who like employees of my company, the people who believe in me, like early investors, things like that too. And that's like a helpful reminder that actually has been like bringing me a lot of more purpose through the work that I do because I'm building a game. Games are cool, and like the work I'm doing is interesting, and I like it. But is it like you know is it life defining to me in terms of like higher level purpose? Am like is my purpose in life just to build a business or a successful company, or is it something more? Like that's kind of stuff I've been trying to talk about to myself with at least a lot lately.
Hmm. Yeah, I can totally empathize with that. Like, I was never a big snacker, and now I'm like one of the biggest snack vendors in college history. And I've asked that a lot of myself. Like, am I really helping the world, or am I just like making life a little bit more convenient for someone? And yeah, I think definitely focusing on people you talk to and meet every day is really important. I find that if I'm too disconnected, I have like a hermit mentality too, and I love extreme focus. So if I don't talk to enough people, I kind of get too disconnected from the ecosystem to where I stop caring, and then I get demotivated because I'm like, what am I doing this for? I don't even eat snacks.
Yeah,
But it's when I'm in the store, when I'm seeing like our employees working, and they're telling me about how much it's affected their experience of college. that's very motivating. And I'm sure when you live stream for your audience, and you see all these people who play your game every
Yeah.
day, that must feel different, right?
Yeah, the building in public, honestly, like it's a really great thing with a business, and it's not easy to pull off. I recommend it for most people if it makes sense. It doesn't make sense for everybody to build in public in like the way that we do. We take building in public at Pixels to an extreme where we basically lay out like everything that we're doing to our community. We do live streams with them every single week. I'm like extremely active in the Discord server, on Twitter, answering questions with people. Like I know the people who play the game like on a personal level at this point. That helps me honestly because it's like, especially when we have done things like airdrops to them, and I see like the impact that it's made on people. That part's cool. Like that is really motivating to me, especially like the fact that we have not just like employees that believe in like what we're doing and like um, like the smaller team, but like an entire like ecosystem of people that like are all aligned with this like vision that we have. Like they're all bought into it. They think it's cool. Like there is something that's really cool about that. So yeah, I think sometimes it's framing. Sometimes it's just like when you work on something for a long time, the way that you feel about it changes too. I think that's part of it. Like you lose
Mm.
that initial like energy that you might have had at the very beginning, and you have to find the real reason why you're working on it.
Yeah, it's like marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, the love fades, and then the loyalty is what keeps you there. You mentioned leveling up stress, and that reminded me of like Elon. I feel like Elon is like a level 100 wizard in the video game, and he's just can take so much stress. But every level, the total volume doesn't really decrease. It's just the nature of the problem changes. You go from like worrying about the broken AC in your studio apartment to like your next office in Europe or whatever. But it's like you're dealing with problems nonetheless. Um, how has that felt for you as like things have gotten bigger and faster, and
Yeah,
how do you deal with
stakes.
the stress?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like the stakes just increase every time you level up a little bit, right? And the risk increases too. So it's funny because the problems that I was dealing with like 2 or 3 years ago, like they wouldn't matter to me at all anymore. Like I would like look at them and I'm like, or even if I compare my life to before when I started the business, where it's like the stuff that stressed me out, it was like just girl problems and like stupid stuff like that. Like that was the most stressful thing in my life before this, and now it's like, oh, it's a lot different, is what I can say. And I think about this a lot. Like if I were to go back into like a normal lifestyle, not running a business, like what I would be feeling, like because the baseline level of stress I had through everything I'm doing that right now is like quite high. And I would like to think I'd be enlightened if I just quit this business now and like started living like a more normal or like less stressful lifestyle. But also maybe I would be bored. Who knows? Probably not. I think I'd be chilling. But I mean, yeah. So basically, every time that we've gotten a bit further and made more progress, the level of responsibility on my own personal shoulders increases. But it's the level of responsibility where it means like I'm not just dealing with my own problems, I'm dealing with other people's problems too. And there's more people that are putting trust into me. So there's more of a reason that I have to like, perform my best, operate well, and the stakes matter even more. When it was just a one person business, if I made a mistake, it just affects me, and I can deal with that, right? When I start to bring my friend into the business, if I make mistakes, like it's a friend that I really care about, that now they're affected, like maybe they quit their job and it didn't work out in terms of the startup, and I've like really impacted a friend of mine who trusted me. And then it keeps going further and further, where it's like, okay, now there's people who are supporting that, families, this kind of stuff. And now it's even further where there's like millions of people that play my game and like put a ton of their time, energy, and life into this. And if we don't deliver in the ways that we want to, it's letting down a lot of people. And yeah, that's kind of a crazy feeling. It's cool also knowing that like as you scale the stress, you also scale the impact too, and the way that you're able to affect people. So it's like it's one of those things that like you can find satisfaction in the impact scaling. It's also like good counteracting feeling to that, right? But you gotta care about the impact too. You can't like if you don't care about the impact and you're just getting stressed, it's not going to feel very good.
Hmm. With great power comes great responsibility, and it makes me jealous sometimes of one person businesses. Sometimes I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
ah,
Honestly, well, I think like truthfully, when people ask me and like, advice on like entrepreneurship now, I really try to push them in that direction, because I
Me
think
too.
that is like the best combination of outcome to stress and lifestyle. I mean, it all depends on what you want in life, right? And I think that's what a lot of people need to think about when they're thinking about their entrepreneurship journey. It's like, I don't think people, I personally, I had no idea what I was getting into when I started the startup. I had no idea the level of commitment it would be. I had no idea like what I would be trading off. It sounded fun to me at the beginning. And I think even my motivation initially was somewhat financially driven, which it's hilarious because if you want to make money, a startup is actually not the right way to do it.
It
It's
is
like
not.
actually the least effective outcome. It's not the least effective outcome. It's like a very, if you do the
It's the
math,
most
it's very,
difficult.
yeah, it's difficult. And if you do the math, it's like you probably have a higher expected return if you just go work at a FANG company versus starting a startup when
Hmm.
you're talking about like
Hmm.
building up a nest egg and like, actually doing the math and
Hmm.
like percentages of things work out.
Hmm.
But, you don't get to do the other stuff that you would be doing starting a startup. So you have to like care about that other stuff too. Do you actually like
Yeah.
the game of company building? Do you actually like the, you know, autonomy, the work that you get to do? Do you like stressful situations? All of this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, if I was starting things over again, I even question sometimes, would I start a venture backed startup again? Or if I do something again, would it be venture backed? I think now I actually am in a boat where if I do something again, it would probably be venture backed. I think the situation for me is slightly different because I think if I started something again, it would be kind of shortcutting a few steps, which is
Mm.
nice. But I don't know if I would go through the pain of getting to this point again. And I think if I was advising like myself 5 or 10 years ago, I'd probably say really try to make it work with a cash flowing business, try to make it as lean as possible, try to
Mm.
optimize your lifestyle. But here we are.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm exactly on the same page, and it's taken me 5 years to really realize that. And sometimes when I talk to young founders who are asking me for advice on fundraising, and they hear like "don't fundraise," they're like, "Whoa!" Like paradigm doesn't compute,
Yeah.
because fundraising has now become another career path of like, oh, I just start a startup and then I fundraise and then I start building, and it's like, wait, what? What are you doing? What are you actually trying to get out of it?
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I don't know why. I think during like zero interest rate, fundraising became like a prestige thing.
Mm, yeah.
Where, yeah, it's funny because like I don't want to downplay anybody's experience fundraising because I had a very hard time fundraising for a very long time. But it was so much easier to fundraise back in like 2021 for most companies, especially compared to what
Hmm.
it is now for like early stage founders. And that was the time when a lot of people were fundraising because of that. And yeah, I don't know. I know people personally that like came into it, had no idea what they were getting into, and then decided that it wasn't for them. And so much respect for the people that figured that out sooner rather than later. Because I also know people that keep going and they're like, oh, they're not very happy, or they're not very satisfied doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I have a few friends that have become like millionaires many times over doing online businesses, courses, education, and we've generated the same amount of revenue. And I'm just like, the ROI doesn't seem great, but I will say it's been such an educational experience, like managing like so much capital at such a young age, and the
Yeah,
resources and the responsibility, and like in terms of training, it is next level for sure.
I agree. So like I think that's where I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of doing this, where I don't think there's anything, literally anything I could have done that would have pushed me as hard as this. And I before I started doing this, I was a very growth mindset oriented person. It's funny because I channel a lot of that energy into like other things, not business. It was like physical stuff,
Hmm.
like climbing mountains or like racing. But yeah, it's interesting like how that translates into this because there's literally nothing I could have done in life that would have equated to this kind of experience and like this kind of growth on the personal side of things. Because in a business, it's hard in a way where you don't have a choice, which is different than certain circumstances. It's like in when I'm like doing some like outdoor activities and sports, it's like, okay, if I don't want to do something, I just don't plan that trip. Or um, like, or I just turn around early, right?
Hmm.
In a business, again, with like this level of responsibility, you don't have that choice. And there's things that you have to do every single day that you don't want to do. You just absolutely do not
Hmm.
want to do it. And if you don't do it, business won't work. So you kind of have to just make yourself do this kind of stuff. And that's where the growth actually happens. I think growth is fighting that resistance of doing things that feel extremely uncomfortable and making yourself do them anyways.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Doing the hard things, the thing you
Yeah.
don't want to do, it's often the thing you need to do most. I think, you mentioned that like an hour or two of exercise, an hour or two of yoga is actually so ideal because when you push your body that hard, you're training your mind that you're the boss here. And when you're confronting like a difficult work task, like some paperwork or email you have to get through, you're already used to it. You're used to the pain. That's why I train jujitsu because it's like, I honestly sometimes I'm like, do I even enjoy this? This is just so boring and like sweaty and like, but I force myself to do it because I know it makes my brain stronger.
Yeah. No, it's funny because like that kind of stuff I've actually never really needed to force myself to do. I legitimately love that stuff. And it's interesting, like I'm a type 2 fun type of person. Like there is something maybe hardwired in me differently than like some other people where I've been like this for a long time. If something gets miserable, like if there is a situation where I'm around other people, like, for example, I used to lead backpacking trips and, say it rains in the backpacking trip, it's super muddy, it's cold. And like the people I was leading started to get like a little down. For some reason, that's when I perk up and I'm like having the best freaking time. There's something that wakes up in me. Like I love kind of suffering for some reason because I think when I dig into like the psychology behind it, I just like really interesting experiences. Like I like having stories to tell. I like having like things that are unique and like pushing through things. Like the whole story of like persevering through something or like that kind of stuff. I think it's like some narrative inside of my mind that I just really enjoy and like. And yeah, it's a similar thing with this kind of stuff too, where it's like, yeah, I kind of like the suffering. I kind of like the like hard stuff about this, and then for some reason exercise, I just, yeah, it's nice.
Mm,
But also there is something when I think about like exercise and physical fitness, I think a lot about energy maximization. Like I what I like to think about is how do I make it so I have the least amount of friction to do the most amount of stuff that I want to be doing. And for me, energy is key to that. Like I need to have like the willpower and the energy and like the desire to like do all the stuff that I want to be doing. So even before I started a business, like that was kind of like a large focus of mine. People would come up to me and like, I was known as like an extremely high energy person.
mm,
And yeah, it still kind of like plays into this too. It's the business like saps more energy out of you than maybe my other lifestyle, stress and this other stuff. But yeah, like the more energy that you have and like you build it up through exercise, diet, sleep, and all these other things, like the more you're going to be able to get done and like the less
mm.
friction there is to at least doing it.
Yeah, I kind of visualize, like a mechanical flashlight with like a magnifying glass. Like you pump and then the light kind of shines brighter. And then the magnifying glass, how well you focus the light determines your total output. And like most people have really poor energy, like energization protocols. They don't exercise, they don't sleep well, they don't eat well. Um, they don't get enough sun, all this stuff, and so they're already at a baseline low, like 1 out of 10 energy, and then their focus is like 1 out of 10. So they just get like a one output, and they're like, how are these people getting like a 10,000 output? Because they have like 10 out of 10 energy, but they also have 10 out of 10 focus, which is a multiplier on your energy. So it's always going to the right thing, right? Like when I think the fact that all the great entrepreneurs also only have 24 hours in a day, they're just working on the right things. And so focus has become a huge passion of mine. Just like really realizing the power of focus because energy has a diminishing returns. You can only be so energetic, but if you don't know how to focus, it's like you can't get anywhere. It
Yeah, no,
feels
I've
like.
definitely been in stages of life where I'm high energy but low focus, and it's like not as effective. It's way more effective than being low energy, low focus. But yeah, you need to focus too for sure.
Yeah, sometimes I'm like low energy, high focus, and I'm like, did I just get as much done as I did when I was like running around like a madman? but with no focus. Huh. It makes me reevaluate like being busy. You know, this idea of like being busy. Um, so you mentioned sailboat. You mentioned Africa trip. What has been your personal favorite or like most extreme condition you've been in? You've shared a story with me before, maybe something similar.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was in the early stages of the business, I was full time traveling too. It was like one or two person business. So I still had a lot of freedom and flexibility. It's not something I could pull off now with the amount of like responsibility I have, but when it was more of a flexible schedule, it worked just fine. So yeah, I initially lived in New Zealand. I sailed from New Zealand to Fiji. I lived in Fiji for a while, and I was kind of like sailboat hitchhiking when I was like building out some stuff. So I would just like help people with their boats. Um, yeah, like surf a good amount, and then yeah, code my product, and then yeah, eventually I ended up in Kenya, and that was super interesting. I was like, basically what happened was I my visa in Fiji was getting iffy. I didn't want to go back to the US yet. I was having like nightmares of being back in the US actually. I would literally like when I was living in Fiji, I would like wake up in a cold sweat, imagining that I had like left Fiji and went to the US. I was like terrified of it. So like that was not an option in my mind. I don't know. We can dig into that maybe, but yeah. Instead of going back to the U.S., I went to Kenya. I found this spot in the middle of the bush in northern Kenya in Samburu County, that was like by this mountain. There was like a bush camp there, and then there was this 4G tower too. So like the bet, I didn't even know if this was gonna like fully work out, but the bet was like if I go there, like I probably can get 4G internet and like do some work there. And yeah, I started emailing some people there. I basically like worked out this agreement with them where I paid them $1,000 a month. I could like live in this bush camp with this like tribe and village there. And yeah, I was there for like 2 or 3 months, and it was the craziest like couple months of my life. Where yeah, I was like literally in the middle of the bush. There were like giraffes that would walk through the camp and elephants that would walk through the camp every now and then. Elephants are scary as hell. Also, like that's not a fun thing. But
Wow.
yeah, at the same time, I was like working off of 4G and solar power every single day. And yeah, I learned a ton there. It was just like the most insane life experience I could have because I was like literally like in this like two worlds. I was starting a startup. I actually got my first venture check invested into the company when I was in that tent. Like I was literally pitching in the tent and everything like that. That was when we got into that first startup accelerator with like the 120K check, which was like life changing at the time. And then yeah, like I would spend like half a day just doing like random stuff, like going to milk camels or goats or like doing whatever. And yeah, I love that experience and time. But yeah, also had like a pretty crazy experience there too, where I got like in a bit of trouble. I'm a really big risk taker, and that is always how I've lived my life. And there's no other way I can imagine living my life without taking this level of risk because it's gotten me into like some amazing scenarios and like it's just led to like a very interesting life that I feel very satisfied with. But yeah, it also leads to like some not so great situations. So yeah, when I was in Kenya, me and a friend who I like had convinced to quit his job and move to Kenya with me for that time period. We had like had a car and we rented the car for like the entire time that we were there. We were just paying for it monthly from this random dude, and we took the car to this national park, Sava West National Park, and the intention was we were just going to go there, like camp for a few days, like drive down to the base of Kilimanjaro, and then like drive back up, and then like get back to like whatever you're doing in the bush. And yeah, we started driving. Day one was amazing in the park, like no issues there. Day two, I got in a car accident. So essentially, I was driving the car, and I was driving a lot faster than I should have been. And even my friend had pointed it out earlier in the day. He's like, dude, you got to slow down. And I was like, oh, no, we're fine. And yeah, like about halfway through the day, I'm like cornering around this turn, and the car wheels start like slipping, and we flip the car over twice, and the car lands upside down. Um, yeah, it was a pretty not good situation. Like essentially, I should be dead after that situation. Like me and my friend were both stranded in the middle of the bush without any cell phone service. without anybody knowing where we were, without like any. We had like a day of food and like a day of water, and like we were like deep in a park that like nobody goes to. It's also like the largest park in Africa. Um, yeah, I mean, key takeaway there. Obviously, I'm okay now. Really bad situation was, we got rescued after like 12 hours. Some crazy stuff happened in the meantime. We had to like run through a river full of hippos, to climb up a mountain. Like, yeah, it wasn't the most fun experience. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great way to like learn life lessons. I did learn a lot of life lessons through that though. Partly like risk management, partly also understanding like risk management with myself versus other people too. Where yeah, my it's funny. My takeaway, maybe this is kind of psycho, is when it comes to my own level of risk taking, I wouldn't change anything about how I manage my own risks because again, like I wouldn't have ever been in the situation of like being in the places that I've been, living the life that I have, if I hadn't been taking this level of risk. So yes, I almost died. That's crazy. Like probably shouldn't do that again, but like again, I don't really regret the level of risk I'm taking. But I shouldn't have put somebody else that I care about in that situation. And the level of risk I need to take with other people needs to be really dialed back. And there needs to be consent in the level of risk I'm taking when it comes with other people as well too. So that was not good in that like situation. Like my friend literally said, this is not a risk that he wants to take. I put him in that situation anyways. He trusted me and I almost killed my friend in that situation. So I mean, yeah, it's crazy like the life lessons that you learn through risk taking and some of this kind of stuff. Again, it's like one of those lessons where you hope you don't learn it the hard way, but some lessons you only learn the hard way. I mean, that kind of stuff is really, really relevant. Like this situation specifically to how I run my company and how I make a lot of my decisions now. Because I am leading a bunch of people into this journey. They are taking on a high level of risk when they come on this with me, especially the people that were really early. They took a really high level of risk, and the decisions I need to make are important. And I do need to take some level of risk, but I also need to be really careful the level of risk I'm taking when it comes with other stakeholders as well too. If it's just me, like I'm gonna put all my money on black and just see what happens. But like I can't do that with other people's money. I can't do that with like my employees' livelihood. So I mean, yeah, it also kind of dives into stoicism and like all this stuff kind of connects in some way or another. But yeah, I mean, I think the other point here too is like the real life stuff, like having real life experiences. If I hadn't experienced all this kind of stuff, I wouldn't be the founder I am now. I don't think I would actually have been able to create and like get here if I hadn't gone and lived life a little bit. It's interesting because I see some people start companies straight out of college without actually having lived life. And I don't know, like there's a couple of things I would like personally on a personal level, like feel not great about there, where it's like one, starting a startup is an extreme sacrifice compared to the other life that you could be living outside of this kind of stuff. Like tech startups, it is a very small portion of like all the life that you could be living. And I think it's really easy to get into this bubble and kind of forget that there's other stuff out there. Like I've experienced a ton of freedom, a ton of other things in life that I know are equally as fulfilling as doing this. And I also know that's also waiting for me outside of this if I ever choose to leave the startup game. And I know there's something more to all this than just building a business, capitalism, that kind of stuff. The other thing too is like these kinds of lessons that you learn from living real life are extremely valuable to actually like accomplishing some hard things too. So yeah, I think that all kind of ties in together.
Wow. Yeah, man, I love how you just said, "Oh, casually got over a river of hippos." That's like the scariest scenario of all time. I'm also learning so many lessons just hearing the story again of like, yeah, taking risk relative to others is also something I'm not great at. Like, we've had a couple rounds of layoffs, and like, I've almost become, because they hurt so bad, and it's your closest friends, that you kind of have to like block out some of it. And like I've become a little desensitized to this idea that like what I do has this real impact on people's lives and their livelihoods and their families. And yeah, like being responsible for capital that isn't yours um, takes a lot of maturity.
Well, I mean, yeah, the other thing that like I think some founders need to realize is like, we're actually kind of good at convincing people to do things, and that actually
We
is like
are.
that's kind of like it's a power that you need to take very seriously, because you can
Mm,
convince people to take risk with you, but should you be informing
mm,
them, like, all this kind of stuff too. It's like it's an important thing to realize, where it's like you obviously have to do this as a founder. It's like part of your job to like build something. You need strong conviction in what you do, but like, it also makes me second guess what I'm building a lot of the time too, because it's like, okay, if I'm convincing these people to take on this risk, I better be damn sure myself that this is an appropriate risk to take, and that I think that we can pull this off for them. Like, I'm not going to lie to these people. I'm not going to like take them into a situation that I don't have full confidence or faith in. Like, if I am leading them into something, I need to be damn sure of it.
mm. Yeah, and I noticed that in little ways when I manage my team, especially junior employees. It's like I'll say a bunch of ideas and then they'll do exactly what I said. And I'm like, they were just ideas, but you got to recognize this, like, like obviously the seniority and then that dynamic and your persuasion, your natural sales ability. Um, it's hard to understate. So we have a little bit of time left. I love to hear a bit about you today. Obviously, you guys have just a big ICO. Could you tell me a bit about that experience? Like, what's the market cap at now? That's crazy.
Yeah, no, that's nuts. It's funny because like 8 months ago, Pixels, like I was like, oh, we weren't getting a lot of people believing in us. And it's funny because we haven't really changed what we were doing in the last 8 months. We've just kind of been chugging along, like same exact vision, mission. But capital was really tight, to the point where like we barely had any money. I thought we were gonna die for sure. We finally found like one investor that took like a big leap of faith on us, that we were able to like string it along for a bit longer. And then, yeah, like a couple months ago, we had an ICO, and it was actually one of the largest of the year. I think we opened up like a $2.5 billion, FDV, like fully diluted value. And we're still sitting, even though the market's corrected a little bit and like kind of pulled back a bit, at like over 2 billion FDV, which is nuts. So it's funny because we went from dying to being like, I think like a top 150 Web3 or crypto company in the world within a matter of like 6 months. And yeah, I mean, that's been my experience in general. Like, I think startups, like Pixels has almost died probably like 5 or 6 times, like legitimately almost died. When we first raised our pre-seed round, or like our seed round back in December 2021, I had $800 in the business bank account and $200 in my personal account when the first $2 million wire arrived in. Um, like, it was cutting it to like the bare bones minimum. It was crazy, like how tight it got. Like, I wouldn't have been able to pay myself. Like, I don't know what I would have done, to be completely honest.
Mm,
If even it took like a week longer to hit, and that was like, yeah, near death there. And like this has happened a couple of times too, where it's like,
yeah.
that's just how it goes. Like, you have to be okay with things like almost going away. Like, you can't have too much personal attachment to it. You
Mm,
can't have too much ego tied into it, because one, if you do, when you're going down, if you have too much ego or identity attached to things, you're actually probably gonna self sabotage it. My own like personal experience and like what I've seen with other people, and you might actually rob yourself of an opportunity for something good to happen if there's that attached, because you're not done until it's done.
mm,
And you can actually fight for things a bit longer than you might think as well too. And two, I mean, yeah, like success or bad, like I think things ebb and flow, right? Like, we just had some great couple of months over the last 2 months. Like, we're sitting like really well. We're the leading game inside of Web3. We have like a great token behind us, and it's a great time period now. I'm sure it's going to get a lot harder in the next couple of months, or maybe it might take a year or something like that. But it's not always going to be good times, right? Like, it ebbs and flows, and being okay with that is really important. So like, it's funny because like I think it's a very stoic or like Buddhist kind of approach too, where it's like,
mm-hmm.
you know, I think maybe I should be celebrating the highs more than I am, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I just know it's like this is great now, and then yeah, maybe later it won't be. So
Yeah. The whys are alike in pain and pleasure, success and failure. And that's, I do like a surrender meditation every morning and night to train my brain to detach from outcome. I think
yeah,
you're great at it. It's like, you know, talk about near death experiences. We've also had 4 or 5, like the pandemic, running out of runway, as like all these like crazy macro environments, like inflation through our supply chain, labor, like colleges shutting down, like, and I think to like SpaceX fourth rocket blowing up, or Tesla being one day away from bankruptcy in 2008 and 2016. It's like, it's just, you have to be able to look at death in the face and say, not today.
Yeah, or it is what it is. If I die,
Or
so
it is what it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but like never giving up. Never giving up until it's actually over. Um, that's a really profound lesson, I think, that startups teach you.
yeah, yeah, and not getting too stressed too. Like if I was paralyzed by stress when things were getting really tough, it would have been over for sure.
Mm.
But because I'm somewhat capable of handling this level of stress, it's worked out better.
Awesome. I have so many other questions for you, but I think on that note, it's been an amazing conversation with you, Luke. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it. And yeah, no, likewise too. I've been doing like a lot of podcasts and stuff like this, and nobody ever asks these questions. It's all about pixels, pixels, pixels. I like talking about this stuff too.
Yeah, I would love to have you on again. This has been definitely the best conversation I've had in a long time. And yeah, there's a lot more we can dig into this. So we'd love to see you on the program again.
Yeah, man. Down.
All right. Have a good one, Luke. Bye.
Bye.